help but wonder where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Can't help but wonder where I'm bound.
All right, everyone, welcome back to What's the Rush? And this is where world renowned leaders and amazing humans share transformative insights that they've discovered in life's quietest moments. From the peaks of achievement to the depths of challenge, our guests reveal profound wisdom that they've never before shared, and wisdom that doesn't come from the spotlight, but that comes from the moments of stillness and reflection and the challenges that they've faced. So today's guest, I'm so excited to talk to. I've been really inspired, not just because of what she's done and achieved, but because of who she is and how she lives her life 100% authentically. Dr. Hebah Hefzy is a force of nature. She's a first generation Egyptian American, a neurologist, a mom of three, an ultra running endurance athlete, and she is breaking barriers in every space that she walks or runs into. And I invited her on the podcast because she represents courage and motion. And her journey from struggling to finish 1 mile on a run to becoming the first hijabi to run the Western States 100 is about so much more than sport. It's about identity, healing, and defying expectations and living authentically. I know you're going to walk or run away from this conversation feeling empowered to own your story, even when it's really hard. Hiba's presence is so powerful, and her voice is one that the world really needs to hear. So, lucky us today, we get to talk to Hiba. Welcome to What's the Rush?
Thank you. Gosh, you're making me blush already.
Well,
I
one of
really
the best
appreciate that
parts of
introduction.
this adventure journey that I'm on with this podcast is getting to kind of study and learn about people that I didn't know about before. And we were introduced through mutual partner Goo Energy and Yuri Oswald. And I'm so excited to have you here. And Goo is sponsoring this episode of the podcast because of you. So
Oh, that's awesome.
love that
Yeah,
our worlds
Yuri's great. I'm so blessed to have met him. He's been such a neat inspiration in the space that he's in and just introduced me to things I didn't even know I would be interested in. So he's awesome.
well, that's a good place to start because you, as we said in the intro, you have multifaceted identities. You are a doctor, you're a mom, I think you finished medical school at 22, is that right? You became a doctor
Yeah,
at 22.
that's
Um,
true.
you're a Muslim American, you're now an athlete, which is a newish identity for you. And so
Yes.
yeah, there are a lot of layers. And when we last talked, you actually said you were giving a speech to the medical community about owning all the different facets of your identity. Do you want to share that? Because you said that you were a little bit nervous about giving that speech, and maybe touch on sort of the broad um, kind of like huge soup that makes up the identity of a person, because often we look at, oh, you're a doctor or you're this or you're that, but you have so many layers to you. So I'd love to dive into the identity conversation a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, I did graduate from med school and I was 22, and I feel like in my 20s, my identity was very largely focused on being a doctor and being the best doctor I could be and building my career. And I identified almost exclusively as a physician. I did get married kind of at the very end of med school. And then at the end of my residency, I started having kids, and my identity began to change. And I think the way that I approached the world and still do as a mother physician is different than when I was, just a physician, for example. And as I look back on my journey, I think every every new challenge and every new opportunity changes your identity, and having the courage to accept that change and embrace it and move in that direction has been something that I've learned and continue to learn to do.
Yeah, well, one sort of consistent that's been throughout all of these evolutions of your career and finding sport, being a mom, being a wife, now being divorced now, but the one consistent has been your faith, your Muslim faith. And
Yeah.
can you
So
talk
I
about?
am the child of Egyptian immigrants. My parents were born and raised in Egypt and came to America for grad school and then had me. So I had a very conservative upbringing, both culturally and religiously. And I think a big part of my life growing up was my Muslim faith. My mom is the principal, she still is, of an Islamic school, which I attended. And so I wore hijab at a really young age. The majority of my friends were Muslim growing up. And actually, the first time I had friends that were not Muslim is when I went to a public high school for the last 2 years of high school. And I was the only girl in my high school who wore hijab. And luckily, I think probably attending an Islamic school and knowing and being very comfortable in my identity as a Muslim really helped me address the challenges that one would expect when you're the first ethnic looking and Muslim looking woman in a very Caucasian suburban high school. There were a lot of questions, a lot of jokes, and I think I took it all in stride. And I remember I could be really snarky, and sometimes people would say things like, "Man, like, aren't you so hot in that?" And I would roll my eyes and be like, "Well, you're hot too, and anyways, hell is hotter." I had like all the ridiculous snarky responses, but um I think those things all made me more steadfast in my faith and prepared me for other challenges that I would face later in life. Especially, for example, post 9/11, that was when I was in med school and going through rotations as a hijab wearing brown, Muslim woman was definitely challenging. Patients would request that I not go in their room during my rotations. When I was a resident, people asked for a different doctor. And you have to shake it off and remind yourself that they're reacting to what they see in the media and they don't know me. They just know what the media has told them people like me are like, and it was a time where a lot of my friends and a lot of people I know felt like they shouldn't identify as Muslim anymore for safety reasons and stopped wearing hijab and tried to blend in. And I think it was in those moments that I held even more strongly to my faith. And I felt like it was that much more important to show that just because I am Muslim, it doesn't make me a terrorist. And I feel like that's common sense to you and I, but at the time, it really was news to people.
I can't even imagine. Yeah, like so someone asks that you don't come in the room as their doctor or that they get a different
Yeah.
doctor. How do you handle that? Like how do you let it roll off and not affect you
I
personally?
mean, I won't say that there weren't tears
Yeah.
sometimes. It's very hard to not let it affect you personally because you want to stand up for yourself and say, you know, like, you haven't even heard me talk. Like, give me a chance. I'm actually very capable. And, wearing hijab, it's the first thing people know about you when you walk into a room. You are Muslim, and you don't really get a chance to tell anybody anything else about yourself before they've already decided what they think of you. And it was really difficult. And I remember even as an attending in Detroit, which is very, very diverse, a couple of years into being here, there was a patient who submitted a very bizarre letter to human resources saying things about me that were not true. But one of the things was that I had looked very disheveled, and my chair, when he showed me the letter, kind of chuckled and was like, "You're the best dressed person in this department. That's how I know this letter is a joke."
Yeah.
And you just have to take those things in stride. And I'm sure there are things that existed on Google where somebody might have said something and it was really triggered by having a negative connotation associated with my faith. And I hope that the majority of the time people get to know me and it changes the stereotype they have and will hopefully affect the way that they interact with other Muslims in a more positive way.
Have you seen a shift since, it's 9/11 was a while ago, and
Oh
you've been
yeah.
in your career a long time, have you seen a shift in how people are receptive towards you?
Definitely, yes. Definitely a shift for the positive. I think to a degree there will always be a stereotype just as being someone ethnic. Especially in medicine, being an ethnic woman, you're just such a minority. And then an ethnic Muslim woman on top of that, it's like triple minority. So you just have to work much, much harder than the average person to prove that you're abilities and your worth and that you are able to do the same job as everybody else. And it doesn't matter if you are more qualified, it is assumed that you are not, and you just have to really fight tooth and nail to establish your kind of place in the workforce.
I mean, that's something that strikes me about you is that you work extremely hard in your career, in your family. I mean, and we will get to running in a minute because, well, I will just say that your visibility in running and I'm sure in your medical career is actually shifting how people see Muslim women and how people see, you know, don't make a snap judgment because you are actually showing so many people who you are as a human being, regardless of what you're wearing. And so,
Well, that just gives me goosebumps to hear, honestly, because, if there's anything that I hope, it's that it being who I am and doing it hopefully as best as I can will make things better for somebody else who comes after me, or somebody who might face a similar struggle that they may not face it. That's kind of that's the whole goal.
do you feel like, I mean, I know you because of your ultra running and you getting into sport. Do you feel like that is your sort of visibility, or are you in the medical field in your profession? I'm assuming you're a bit of a rock star like you are in the ultra
Well,
running
so
world.
actually, let me tell you, I would have to kind of take a step back from that and say in my community.
Yeah.
So in my community, now it's different. And now you are seeing more and more women become professionals, and seek, careers in things like medicine. But 20 years ago, when I was pursuing a career in medicine as a Muslim woman, your primary goal was to be present for your family and to have children and to choose a career that would be conducive to that. And it wasn't really thought that being a physician would be conducive to having children and running a household successfully. And so there were not a lot of Muslim women who were going into medicine. And so I think that in my community, it makes me happy that my community looks up to women like me. And I think there has definitely over the last 20 years been a shift, and I'm really proud to see all of my friends' children all pursuing higher educations and careers that are fulfilling to them, regardless of the potential ramifications on future lifestyle.
It's amazing to be able to look back, and I can reflect back on that too, 20 years ago, of like women in sport, even, and
Yeah.
women in mountain biking or women who are running events. There weren't as many of us. So let's go back 20 years to your medical career. You're graduating from medical school, you get married, you're having children and doing your residency and doing rounds with teeny weeny kids, like tiny babies. And so I kind of, let's go back to that where it wasn't really expected that that was the path that you would take. And you were being a mom and, raising a family and doing the career at once, even though they were maybe a little bit conflicting and
Yeah.
pulling on, like, was it pulling on you sort of in two different ways?
It really was, and I remember even when I was going through my rotations, and I think I had just gotten married or right before I got married, and I was engaged, and I had really been interested in things like plastic surgery and some of the surgical subspecialties. And my ex-husband at the time was like, "Yeah, but how are you going to raise your kids if you go into something like that?" And so immediately I nixed like any surgical specialty. And I thought, okay, I ultimately chose neurology, and I think my specialty is very suited to my personality. But a big part of what pointed me in that direction was that I felt like I wouldn't be able to be a good mother if I pursued something that could affect my lifestyle in that negative of a way. When you look now and you see there are so many female surgeons and they're rocking it, and they do have children, and they, have support that help them excel in their career and help patients in the way that they want to, and they're still able to have children and families. So I don't think that the two are mutually exclusive, but at the time I did. And then when I went into neurology and I chose to subspecialize in vascular neurology, which is kind of the worst lifestyle of any neurologist. And I remember the same thing when I was applying for fellowship. My ex-husband again had concerns and was like, "Are you going to be able to take care of our kids?" And I was just confident that when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. I was like, I'm going to find a way, because I was like, I have to choose something that I'm going to find fulfillment in doing for 50 years. And this is what I'm passionate about. And so I chose to pursue it, and I think it's worked out for the best.
Can you talk a little bit about the early years where your kids were really small and you are balancing this? And did you have help at home? Like, did you have caregivers that, or your parents that were helping? Or
No, so my parents till this day both work full time, believe it or not. So I had my first child in my last year of residency. I took an 8-week maternity leave, and then I had to go back to work. And my mother-in-law came and stayed with me for 2 months, and then after that, it was daycare. And I remember, my baby would have a fever and be sick, and I would drive to daycare and give her Motrin and like look at my watch and be like, okay, this is gonna wear off in 8 hours. Like, I better be almost done because I'm sure I'm gonna get a call. And there was so much mom guilt. And I think if there's one advice that I wish I could have given myself then, it's that babies don't remember anything. I like felt like I had to make her baby food and just like anything that I felt like I should do and didn't have time for or couldn't. I felt so guilty about that I would sacrifice sleep or my own well-being to try to like compensate and do it. And at the end of the day, babies actually need love and almost nothing else. They're very self-sufficient outside of that. And at the time it was so stressful, so stressful. I would miss out on like resident gatherings because I felt guilty leaving my baby and nobody else had a baby, so I wasn't going to bring mine. um, Definitely I felt like I felt excluded from the medical environment that I was part of. And also, there's such a hustle culture in medicine. It's maybe a little bit less now than it was then, but at the time, like, you can't use being a parent as an excuse to not perform 100% all the time. Like, you can never be like, my child is sick, I have to leave early. Or, um, my baby woke up 50 times at night, thus I'm a little bit tired this morning. Like, that's never allowed. And so you had to figure out how to almost make it look like you don't have a child at home when you do.
so you kind of touched on something, as a caregiver for family and for kids, and then also your career is taking care of other people. So it seems like something's got to give, and it's probably you, that your
Yes.
health is going to come last in that situation.
Yeah, I think I never thought about my own health, like, ever. I had a super unhealthy diet, a super unhealthy lifestyle. I ate whatever I wanted. There was like zero physical activity outside of like walking and running around at work or taking care of my kids. Yeah, I didn't think about myself in that regard. as far as keeping myself healthy so that I can take care of other people. I never thought of it that way. You just kind of work yourself to the bone because that's what you should do.
So if your patient came in and had your lifestyle, what would you advise them?
I would advise them to prioritize sleep, diet, and exercise because when you're rested, then your brain is more likely to operate at 100%. And honestly, if when you're stressed out, it's hard to be in a good mood, and you put your best foot forward when you are content and happy. And if you're so stressed out that it takes away your contentment and happiness, then you're by definition not putting your best face forward.
So was there a moment that kind of broke for you? All that stress and lifestyle and family and career. Like, what was the tipping point?
The tipping point was it was early in my career as an attending physician. I had just had my third child, and I was counseling my patients on diet and exercise routinely because my job is that I have to help people figure out how to be healthy and not have a stroke. And so one particular patient had luckily a really good recovery from his stroke and was back to work and had a family. He was younger, and he was quite overweight and just really needed to get a little things better aligned. And so I was telling him medically that science shows that there is a 50% reduction in your cardiovascular mortality risk by doing 10 minutes of aerobic exercise every day. And I was like, 10 minutes is nothing. You can wake up 20 minutes earlier than you normally do, and you can find that those 10 minutes. And he just looked at me so snarkily and was like, "Do you do that?" I was so embarrassed. I was like, "Oh my God, I've become that person. I've become the person who doesn't practice what I preach. This is so embarrassing." I'm sure my face turned bright red, and I was like, "No, but I should." You know, luckily I hadn't had a stroke, but I didn't say that to him, but I knew that I had to change something. And at the time my kids were very, very little, so it would have been very hard to wake up early and leave them home alone to go running outside. So I ended up doing it during my lunch break. And I, instead of taking my usual lunch break with my colleagues or using it as time to get caught up on like medical records and stuff, I would run around the hospital. And I couldn't run. I don't even know that I would call what I did running at the time. I would jog, walk intervals. And the first time I ran 1 mile without stopping was like a celebration day. I remember at the end of it, I texted my then husband and I was like, "I ran 1 mile." Like that was such a big deal to me.
I love that one of your patients kind of kicked your butt into gear and was like, hey, if you don't do it, then why should I do it?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
you have every excuse in the book with, small kids and a super stressful and demanding career, but yet you squeezed it into your lunch hour. And
Yeah. And what I talk about with the residents is that even during residency and beyond, like there will be random moments that are unexpected that will define us and will lead to like a pivotal change in our identity. And that was one for me.
are you still in touch with that patient?
No, he hasn't come back to see me.
Good. Maybe
I
he's
hope he
retiring.
should. I hope it's because he doesn't need me anymore.
But how cool that one patient was, yeah, a pivotal moment for you. So why did you pick running? Why not something else? Like, Is it just because it was easy? Because you'd have.
Yeah, it was, it didn't require me going to a gym. I didn't need any equipment. Like I could literally just throw on my running shoes and it was like just something I could do anywhere, anytime. So that's really why I chose it. And I'll tell you, man, I hated running. It was like mechanically very difficult for me. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like I didn't know what even to wear. So like
You
everything
weren't
about
an
it was not comfortable.
you were not
No,
before?
I
No.
had not exercised really in forever. I think I did soccer in middle school, and
Mhm.
then when I got to high school, I dropped it, and that was pretty much the end of my physical fitness until, you know, age 30.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a long time to do no physical activity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, and you know, I was like getting winded going upstairs. Like I was not healthy. Like I had no like endurance of any sort.
You were on your way to be one of your patients.
I was on my way to becoming one of my patients. Absolutely.
Yeah. So this running, so 10 minutes running at lunch, what did that grow into? How did that start to morph and change? And what did you start feeling in yourself? And
Well, it's funny, and I'm sure you've experienced this in your career as an athlete, but when you accomplish one thing that you didn't think you could do, it encourages you so much that you want to try for like the next harder thing. And so when I did a mile, I was like, maybe I can do two. And then I had never, I didn't grow up with a culture of races or like organized athletic events. And so it hadn't really been on my radar. But there in Detroit, they had the Susan Komen 5K Race for the Cure, which is something they do nationally to raise awareness and money for breast cancer and breast cancer research. And at the time, we knew people who had breast cancer. And I felt like it was like a really good cause. And I wanted to participate in that event. And so I signed my ex-husband up for it too. And he was someone, he was like, well, I'll just go walk. And he
yeah,
did. He walked the whole thing. It was fine.
yeah.
But I was like, I trained for it. I did like a couch to 5K program, literally.
Cool.
And I ran the whole 5K. And just, I think running with other people and seeing everybody's why, like, a lot of people were there celebrating that their life because they had, overcome breast cancer, and there were so many survivors and their stories were so inspiring, and just being part of that community and seeing that everybody had a different purpose for why they were there, it really encouraged me. And when I finished the race, I that's where I caught the bug.
Yeah. So what did you feel like when you finished the race? Do you remember like the sensation?
Yeah, I was
Physical-
like, I just finished a 5K race. And at the time, I might have been one of those people that thought any distance was a marathon. Like that's how little I knew about running. Sometimes you'll meet someone and they'll be like, "How was your 5K marathon?" And you're like, "It was good." Might have been one of those people still. But yeah, I felt really like just that I was able to do something I never thought that I would be able to do.
Mm,
And that's kind of what pushed me to keep doing it. And I wasn't at the time thinking I want to run more races. It was more like I like how my body feels moving this way, and I'm just going to keep doing it because I feel healthier and I feel better. And I think my whole lifestyle changed. I started eating healthier. I feel like I started spending more time with like-minded people. And I think that that's kind of where my whole direction changed.
Did your family start taking up running, and did your husband start getting on the training program with you and doing all that?
No, no, nobody else did. I think everybody kind of felt like it was so different than how I had been before that they couldn't understand it. I think a lot of, my family, I think maybe felt like it was a phase I was going through. I think they overall were happy, especially my parents, that I was getting healthy, and that I felt better about myself. And I think when they saw kind of how happy it made me, I think that they were happy to see those changes. But I think even till this day, I don't know if they fully understand why I still do it, especially the distances that I do. I don't think that they necessarily ever will. And you know, my ex-husband never really got into it. And I think in his mind, all he cared about was, okay, as long as you're taking care of the kids and the house, like that should be number one priority, and nothing else is as important.
Yeah. So, from the 5K, did you start then looking at 10K and you started looking at marathons and you started
That's literally what happened. So after the 5K, I signed up for a 10K, and I think the furthest I had run before the 10K was like 4 miles. So, you know, I was very nervous to do a 10K, and I showed up, and you know, at the time, especially, this was like 13, 14 years ago, some of these smaller community events, there were like no Muslims there, like zero. And so I think the 10K that I did, it was called Hightail It for Heroes, and it was like put on by like army vets and their families. And so there really were like no Muslim people there. And I really, really stood out in that specific race. And you know, I don't remember anybody at that event like being particularly negative, but I was stared at a lot. You know, like people were surprised at my presence there. And I won third place for the race, which was shocking to me because like I had never even thought about my pace. I never considered myself a fast or good runner. And so, you know, it was it encouraged me that I was like, you know, maybe like I found this like gift that I didn't know I had. And so that's kind of where I took off to like, you know, continue to push myself. I would run a distance and be able to do it and think, maybe I can go a little farther. Maybe I can go a little farther. And we went from 10K to half marathon, eventually to the marathon.
Yeah, and Boston Marathon and some really big ones, right?
Yeah, so my first marathon was about 10 years ago. It was here in Detroit, and I really felt so bad during that whole race. Like, I like hit the wall pretty early. It was like a true miracle that I finished it, and I thought, what did I do wrong? Like the scientist in me was very curious. And so I just started reading a lot more about how to fuel for longer endurance events, and I was just completely clueless. Like I had done the whole marathon with like no fuel. I had put zero thought into like my breakfast that day. I think I didn't even have breakfast that day. Like you don't know what you don't know. And so I think sometimes I wouldn't consider it a failure. I was so proud of myself that I crossed the finish line. But I didn't feel good when I crossed the finish line. And I thought, I want to do this in a smarter way. And that's kind of what triggered me to become, I wouldn't say obsessed, but I started running more marathons to try to do it in a better and smarter way. And then I got it in my head that I I could potentially qualify for Boston. And I always tell anybody, if I can do it, anyone can do it, because I was never a fast runner. I didn't know how to get faster, and I just kept trying. Like I think I ran like 9 marathons to try to qualify for Boston until I finally did. And I think it's just persistence, and if you really, really want something, you will figure out how to get it.
And what I want to dive a little bit more into, what was it that kept pulling you to do more running or more events or longer distances? What was the pull for you? And like, because I can imagine, you know, running 10 minutes in your lunch hour, you know, you could fit that in, but starting to train for marathons and do that, there's a lot more time. There's a lot more
Yes.
commitment. There's a whole lifestyle change that needs to happen to fit that into your world. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, you had to make some changes. I'm curious about those, but what was the pull that, you know, you made sacrifices to be able to run further and do more events? And and qualify for Boston. So what was pulling you? And
There were a couple pulls. One is I feel like I became a much more confident version of myself through um, becoming an athlete or a runner. And I think that that helped me be a better doctor and a better parent. I think that when you show up confident and comfortable with who you are, you're better able to do the task at hand. And I was more confident even to apply for different roles and positions at work. And so it it helped me change my career path. And then I felt like it was really important for people who looked like me to be in an athlete space. And when I thought about qualifying for Boston, I remember thinking, everybody sees me as this Muslim woman and I show up looking so different. Why not show up looking so different and try to do it well? And I thought it would be very, very neat in my community, especially to have that representation.
yeah, yeah, and I love that you can articulate that showing up not to just finish, but to show up and say, "Hey, you know, I've trained, I've committed time, I'm a good runner, I'm an athlete," and actually add that to your identity sort of salad of calling yourself an athlete instead of
Yeah.
showing up and finishing a 5K, and maybe walking part of it. Like you're now at this point have an identity as an athlete.
And it wasn't until very recently that I even like put that word in my vocabulary. I would say I'm a runner, but I never thought of myself as an athlete. That was very recent.
What
Uh,
what was the shift that you're like, "Oh, I am an athlete." What made you accept yourself in that way or feel worthy to say that word?
Well, to be honest, I think it was somebody called me an athlete, and I was like, I think I am an athlete." And it didn't even come from me, but when somebody else identified me as an athlete, I thought, that's so cool to be able to identify as an athlete. And I reflected on my life and my lifestyle and felt that truly it's such a big part of my identity that not just do I run, but I am an athlete, and I'm really present in that space and hopefully with good purpose.
How are you fitting all these the extra miles in and extra time as you're developing into an athlete and it's becoming part of your daily lifestyle? It's not just one segment at lunch. It's part of your life. So how are
Yeah,
you doing that all
my
in?
kids were really little as I was starting to build my mileage and train for marathons. And so, at that age, they really required my presence. And I came up with all sorts of unique ways to do it. Like I would bring them with me to the track, and most tracks will have signs that say like no bikes, no kids, no balls, whatever. But I disregarded those. I would bring my kids to the track with me with their little tricycles and their balls and their toys,
Oh,
and I would run around the track while they like played in my like field of view. Or if somebody was at soccer practice, I'd take them to soccer practice and I would run around the field.
mm,
So I found ways to fit it in my daily life.
mm.
When I had to do a super long run on a weekend, I would get up really early when they were sleeping, and sometimes I would actually just get a babysitter and pay the babysitter so I would have peace of mind. There's not going to be an emergency. But if I couldn't find one, I lived in a cul-de-sac that was a quarter mile. And if they were sleeping in the house, I would literally just run around the cul-de-sac, and they knew that if they needed me, they could just like pop their head outside and mom was there. Or I would sometimes just check in on them during my run. And I would do like 10, 12-mile runs. And there were only 16 houses in the
Oh my
neighborhood. And all of my neighbors knew me as the runner because they were like, we'd wake up and start making our coffee and look out the kitchen window, and there you are running back and forth.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it makes me think about as, people say they can't fit things into their day or there's no way to do it, but your family is super important to you, running is becoming super important to you, your career is super important to you, and you're finding a way to mesh all these things creatively. Like I can't imagine running around a cul-de-sac 5,000 times. I mean,
I
that's
re-
some mental
I have
strength.
I have this vivid memory where I was like lacing up my running shoes, and my youngest was like not even 3. She's like 2.5. And in her like cute little baby talk, she was like, "Oh, mama, you're going for a run." And I just remember thinking it was so cute, and I wanted my kids to have that like memory growing up. Like our mom was always a runner. When we were little, she would run. I like wanted them to know that I prioritized my health, and that my hobbies mattered, and that I found ways to pursue them while still raising them the best way that I could.
So they're in their teens now, right? So
Yeah.
how has your athletic commitment, has that sort of carried into your children's lifestyle?
Yeah, it has actually. They're all active. None of them run. They're all interested in their own unique sports and activities. But interestingly, it's more in the way that they talk about me with their friends. Like recently, I was driving my daughter and her friend home, and her friend said to me, I Googled you and you have run 100 miles. That's really far. And, I think while my kids won't flat out say it to me because they're teenagers, but I think that they are proud of their mom, because they're not embarrassed by me. They talk about me with their friends like I'm the cool mom. And my oldest, she's almost a senior in high school, so all of her friends are in this Instagram world, and they all follow me on Instagram. And they'll say things like, "You're a baddie." And I'm like, I have made it in this world. Like my daughter's 16-year-old friend just called me a baddie.
Oh, I mean, I love that. And I really am interested because you're a role model for your kids, but also you've touched on this a couple times. You're a role model for other women. You're a role model for Muslims. You're a role model for um, in so many ways. And I'm just kind of wondering what it's like to be really in the public eye in this way, and how people watching, when you show up now, and what kind of pressure does that hold for you?
I definitely feel like I want to represent my community well. So I hold that of like utmost importance, and that does put a lot of pressure, especially, looking back last summer when I was doing Western States, and everybody knew I was the first Muslim woman to run this race, and there was a lot of media coverage around it. I just remember thinking, "Oh my God, like what if something happens and I can't finish?" Like terrified, having that added pressure. But it was good and bad. I think it was good in that it encouraged me to do all the crazy things to train, and like really think outside the box and try to train as hard as I could, so that, you know, as long as nothing unforeseen happened, like an injury on the course, that at least I showed up confident that I trained well enough to finish the race.
Yeah, and that race, I mean, we jumped ahead a little bit. I want to get back to sort of the pandemic years and you finding trail running, but
Yeah.
we can talk about Western States, which was last year. I mean, it's the oldest trail ultra 100 miler in the US or in the world. Or it's the
I
old
believe in the world. I think in the
Yeah,
world.
it's
Yeah.
a really iconic, really well-known race. It's really hard to get into, and you had filled out for the lottery and not gotten in, right? Can you tell us how you eventually got
Yeah.
placed? Because it's really hard to get into it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of backtrack a little bit just to give you an idea of how I even ended up thinking about the 100-mile distance. I live in Detroit, so we don't really have access to a ton of trails, and the ones we have are flat. But I really didn't run much trails until the pandemic, and then during the pandemic, it felt like there was so much tragedy around me, and I was also very attuned to the fact that nobody is promised tomorrow, that literally anybody's life could end any day for any reason. Like, there were young people who were previously healthy, who were not surviving, this like virus. And so I started thinking of all the things that seemed impossible to me, but were still on my bucket list that I wanted to do. One of them was to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And as someone who has like no experience climbing mountains whatsoever, even when I told my friends and family that I was doing this, like, it was definitely met with some surprise. But I thought it would be like such a cool thing to achieve. And so, I just signed up for a trip and decided that I wanted to do it. And I felt like just being someone who can run and have a good cardiovascular reserve, that would most likely be enough to get me through the hike. Um, and so while I had this in the back of my mind, I knew it was coming up. I had been sitting in my daughter's like outdoor soccer practice in a lawn chair, and I saw all this like news feed for the UTMB Mont Blanc 100 miler. Now, I had never before heard of this race, and it just like, the algorithm somehow, like, I just saw these posts about it. I was like, that looks amazing. I want to do that one day. And so then I started reading about it, and I was like, oh, you can't just like sign up. You have to like qualify and build like a reputation for yourself, which they call the UTMB index. And there are a lot of things you have to do to even be allowed to enter the lottery. And then when you enter the lottery, it's like you and your luck. And I was like, well, step one is see if you can run 100 miles. So that's literally what it was. And so I looked at my work schedule, and I found a weekend where I would be able to get away, and it gave me like four months to train for this 100-mile race. And you don't know what you don't know. So in my head, I'm like, I can ramp up my mileage over 4 months and I'll be good. And then this 100-mile race is really close to it's like right after when I'm doing Kilimanjaro, and I feel like climbing Kilimanjaro would be training for a 100-mile race. Like, that's what I thought of it as. And so at the time, I had just started working with my coach, who's still my coach now. And so I texted her. I was like, look what I just did. And I sent her my registration. And she was like, okay, figure it out. And she and I kind of would read about these things together and came up with a training plan together, which was mostly just running a lot more than I was used to running. Like, I think I got up to like 60 or 70-mile weeks, and that required doing double runs sometimes. So in the morning and then again at night. And then I took some time, a week off of training, to go do Kilimanjaro, which was very hard, but very, very fulfilling. I, just be like getting to the top. And I recorded a video when I got to the top because I was worried that I would forget how hard it is. Because it's kind of like childbirth. Like, when time goes on, like, you forget how hard that moment was, and all you remember is like your beautiful baby that you got as a result. And so I just wanted to always remember the struggle. So, like, in the video, like, my lips are blue, I look absolutely horrible, and I'm like panting, and I'm like, that was so hard. We've had the worst weather this whole time. Like, and I like recounted all the horrible, like, like accidents that happened, like when I accidentally like fell into a hole in the ground that was a toilet, and like all the stuff. And so but when I look back at it, I think what made it so meaningful was how hard it was. I think if it were easy, it wouldn't have meant as much. And so the struggle and the difficulty of it is what made it so rewarding, and it was so epic and so beautiful. And when I came back, I came back with COVID actually. So then, I had like 4 weeks till this 100-mile race, and in my head I was like, I'm basically just tapering. And so I show up to the race, and it was because it was during COVID, there were still these restrictions. So you didn't show up to a start line full of excited people. You show up completely alone. It was everybody had to start on their own, and it was dark, and you just kind of start running into the woods. And it was 5 loops of a 20-mile course, which is good and bad. The bad part is you pass the parking lot 3 times. Like you have 3 opportunities to quit. Um, but I got to mile 40, and my mom was so worried because this distance was so radically longer than any distance I'd ever run. So I called her at mile 40 to reassure her that I was okay. And I remember at the time I felt exhausted. I was like, I don't know where I'm going to find 60 more miles today. I'm already so beat. And I called her, and I had to convince myself that I was okay. And I was like, I feel great. I can't believe 40 miles have already gone by. This is the best day ever.
You were lying to your mother, and it was you.
It was a white lie. Um, but yeah, that day was an epically hard day, and I don't think I would have made it but for the support of my friends who came to crew and pace me and listened to all of my complaints and all of my crying. And I can't imagine, because I've never paced anybody who did this, but literally I was crying because everything hurt and I had no energy, and I was like, I know I have to finish, but I really don't want to. Just
Yeah.
like, how do you deal with that as a pacer? I actually really feel bad for them. But they were great. They were like, you're going to do it. Like, even if it's hard, you're going to do it. What do you need? What can we do to make this less miserable? And them just being there, I think really really meant so much to me, that they gave up their like weekend and came out to the middle of nowhere to be with me in the cold to help me achieve my goal. That's the beauty of the running community. And so I did finish by some miracle. And when I finished, they told me that I finished in a Western States qualifying time. And I was like, oh, okay. So let's learn a little more. And I had heard of Western States, but I guess I didn't realize that it would even be in my ability to ever run that race. And so then I learned that when you run a qualifying race, you put your name in the lottery, and so I put my name in the lottery, and I did not get in. And so then I was like, well, now I have it in my head that I want to do this amazing, the first 100-mile race in the world. I need to try again. So the next year I ran a qualifier again. And actually, I didn't run another 100-miler. I ran 100K, which there are a handful of 100Ks that you can run to qualify. And I put my name in the lottery. And again, I did not get in. And I was so mopey about it. And I, I was like, I'm going to be 60 by the time I get in, and I might not even be running anymore. And I was going through Instagram, and Goo Energy had made a post in collaboration with Western States. And in their post, they said, we're sponsoring 2 athletes who qualified but didn't get in through the lottery, who identify as part of basically a minority group. Send us your story, and we're going to pick 2 people. And so I sent them my running story, and in January of 2024, they sent me an email, and they were like, we really loved your story of like not being able to even run a mile to being able to run 100 miles. And, as someone who's didn't previously identify as an athlete, the community that you come from and the profession that you come from, you would bring a lot to the race, and we would love to, watch you and help you try to get to the finish line. And I ran through my house screaming like I'd won the lottery, literally. And my kids were like, what happened? They probably thought we did win the lottery. And I was like, I got into Western States. And of course, they had no idea what that even was. But when I called my coach to tell her, and she like had tears in her eyes. And I mean, the people who knew how much it meant to me were so happy for me. And so I'm forever grateful to Goo for giving me that opportunity. And through it, it's actually opened, other doors and has really helped me kind of enter the world of an athlete a little more. And it's been really, really amazing.
Yeah, you are definitely, I mean, and you finished Western States, spoiler alert to everyone. Yeah, the first hijabi to not only line up, but to finish
Yeah.
in the history of the.
I was so shocked to see my photo on NPR of all places. I- it was such an honor. And I chose to run it the last mile carrying the Palestinian flag because that is a cause that means so much to me. I'm not Palestinian, but I think that you don't have to be Palestinian to feel strongly for just the tragedy that's happening there. And I felt that if I could bring hope to one person by doing that, then it was worth it. And, it was so well received, and that meant so much to me.
I mean, your running story and it has obviously changed your life. It started as something for your own health and your own physical health and wellness, and has grown into something that is obviously is fueling you personally, your family, but people around the world are being inspired and moved to be outside and to move because of you. And it's a really big journey that's happened in just 10 short years, right? Of You've only been running 10 years.
Yeah, a little more than 10 years. Yeah, 12, 13 years. It's crazy. And that makes all of the hard times worth it. All of the times where I had imposter syndrome and felt like I didn't fit in the space and had to really put on my big girl pants to show up. All of the times where I felt like maybe it made me question whether I was being a good mother by pursuing this hobby. And so many times I was like, maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe I would be a better mom or a better physician if I used the time that I used to train to do those things instead. And to have to kind of squash those doubts and remind myself that I'm setting an example for my kids, that I want them to pursue hard things and do hard things and be curious, and show up in spaces where they don't think that they fit, but feel a calling to be in that space, that they should still show up. And that's why competing in hijab means so much to me, because I want anybody who has that doubt to kind of get past it. And I think when you put yourself in these uncomfortable positions, you grow from it. And so many times I haven't wanted to show up as the person who's going to stand out. It's really hard to draw attention to yourself. But I think that doing the hard thing has helped me grow personally, and I hope inspired other people to also want to try doing hard things because of how it would help them grow.
Yeah, I think about the spaces that you operate in, from your medical community, your Muslim community, the athlete community, and in each space, it sounds like you felt like maybe you weren't enough sometimes, or you didn't belong sometimes, and yet you have all these identities. If we come back to the beginning of the conversation, that you've added more identities and more layers, but each one is elevating the other. And so it's not taking away from one, from being a mother. It's actually, running's not taking away from being a mother. It's lifting it up. And, you being a minority woman in medicine is not taking away from you being a great mom. It's actually, they're all kind of supporting each other. Is the energy from all of these are kind of overlapping, is what I'm seeing. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it does. You put it so eloquently. I don't think I could have said it better myself, actually. Thank you. That resonates with me. That resonates with me a lot. Um, I was recently talking to the neurology residents in our training program about how your identity will change as time goes on, and for them to have the courage to embrace it, because that's how we grow, by embracing the hard thing.
Well, and I think about too, as an athlete, it's sometimes when you're really tired and you're like, I'm too tired to go out and exercise or move. And then when you go do it, you actually get more energy, which is totally counterintuitive of like, I don't have the energy to go out and run or bike for half an hour, but then after you do it, you're energized, or at a finish line of a race, you're dead physically, but you feel energy from the emotion of doing that. And so I sort of think about physical energy expenditure, how it actually gives you energy back, especially if it's an emotional, a community thing, or something like a big challenge. You're actually gaining energy instead of spending it. And you're a scientist, so you could probably explain that better than I can.
Absolutely. I absolutely. And I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Huberman, but he's that famous neuroscientist who has a very interesting podcast, but he's recently been talking a lot, and I was telling the neurology residents about this because it's so relevant to what we do, but about the part of the brain called the anterior midcingulate cortex, and how when in athletes it grows and is bigger than in non-athletes, and how when we do things that we don't want to do because they're hard, or that we perceive ourselves as challenged and overcome that challenge, that part of the brain gets bigger, and that it's thought to almost house our will to live, so that when life gives you a really difficult challenge, you're emotionally able to handle that challenge. And so, I think that that's one of the things that endurance sports have brought me to my life. They've kind of made me more mentally tough. And I think that in life, that's such an important skill to have.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it a lot before, but sports are, and especially outdoor sports, are the best practice field for life that we have. And you've experienced that through your ultra running, and um, I've experienced it through my biking. You were telling your Kilimanjaro story, and I rode Kilimanjaro up and down it. I don't know if you knew that, and I
No, I cannot imagine doing that on a bike.
well, the downhill was way more fun than you probably had. The downhill was awesome.
Oh my God, you probably felt like you were on a roller coaster. How long did that take?
I mean, you still have to do the acclimatization, and so the
Okay,
way up is still, I think that they make you take, a
a
couple of
couple
days. You got to
days.
stop at the huts to acclimatize. But the down was like, we were down in like an hour and a half.
What?
It was crazy. Yeah.
That sounds terrifying but exciting.
Exciting. But I share with you, it was a really spiritual kind of place, and it was just a really magical place to be up there and be
Yeah.
high up. And so I love that you were sharing that story. I have a couple more questions before we wrap up. One, when are you going to start riding bikes?
As a neurologist, I see so many concussion patients, and these are largely a result of head injury that has been from bike accidents, and that really scares me from doing it at a competitive level.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a bike and I enjoy riding my bike leisurely,
Yeah.
but I don't think I yet have the bravery to do it competitively. But never say never.
Yeah.
Maybe you can train me.
Yeah. It would be fun. I'd love to meet on a bike or a run sometime with you. That would be
That
amazing.
that would be amazing.
So, last question, because this is called What's the Rush? And sort of the genesis of this podcast was me changing and shifting identities and slowing down a little from being you know, full on competitive athlete and into other things. I'm curious, what in your life are you trying to slow down or get rid of or sort of remove that maybe you don't need?
I think especially being in medicine, you just get used to being busy all the time. And you just have this need to fill every moment with something. And I think I'm learning to get better at just in general slowing down and like just sitting with my kids or sitting with my family or sitting alone and not feeling like I have to be doing something to be productive, but to just kind of absorb and appreciate myself in space and take it as time to reflect. That you just slowing down for someone who has been in this like hustle culture for so long, that is a challenge, but I do find it very rewarding. And I don't know if your experience has been the same.
Yeah, I definitely find it really hard to sit still and do nothing because I'm like, I should be doing something, but I'm shifting my mindset to, well, sitting and looking at the sky is doing something, or
Exactly.
sitting and, playing with my dog is doing something instead of, so I'm with you. I'm shifting my mindset on that of like, it's actually good for your brain. If we go back to the neuroscience of sitting and relaxing is actually good for the brain. And I'm in concussion recovery, so there's
Yeah.
part two of just sitting and letting the brain be still, instead of going through a checklist of all the stuff we should be doing.
Yeah, and I mean, being a concussion patient, you that's where you really learn to be patient because there's not really anything you can do besides wait, you know?
Yeah.
So I think you're doing it right.
Waiting and exercising. I definitely, that has been part of my recovery as well, is getting the blood flowing. So
Good.
yeah. Well, Hiba, thank you so much for all this time. And like, I really do look forward to an in-person meeting where we can be outside running or hiking or bike.
Yes. Yeah, I will race you. I'll race you on a bike. I I think that would be so fun. I've only ever been on a bike with my kids, so it would be really an honor to bike with you one day.
That'll be our next meetup. And in the meantime, thank you for just the inspiration that you're putting out into the world and the positive energy that you bring to everything that you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on here.
Hey, it's a long and dusty road and a hot and heavy load. Folks I meet ain't always kind. Some are bad, some are good, some have done the best they could. Some have tried to ease my troubling mind. And I can't help but wonder where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Can't help but wonder where I'm bound.